everyone. I don't see anyone actually, I just see a screen of my slides. Hello from Germany and Hamburg. We have a very serious heat wave in Europe. So it's really hot here. You guys should be lucky over there. Here, East Coast hasn't been as hot as normal this year. So you know, I couldn't follow all the talks in the morning, but I think they were mostly about the causes of the problem, and you're already familiar with what's going on with the lake. I wanted to change the discussion mode a little bit and touch the institutional aspects of the problem. Right? It seems to a good extent that we kind of understand what's going on, and we have some solutions which seem to be promising. But let's see if there are things that we're missing. So I want to ask some thought-provocative questions, and hopefully that provides some feed for what you're going to do in the rest of the workshop. As Wajad said, I'm from the Center for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London. So Lake Urmia tragedy is one of the worst tragedies that Iran is dealing with. Perhaps the most famous or maybe most severe environmental tragedy in Iran. We're hearing about a 90% loss in the area. Things are better than last year. This year, fortunately, loss of volume. It reminds us of the Aral Sea problem, so that's why we call it, we say Lake Urmia is suffering from the Aral Sea syndrome. But, what is the cause of this? Interestingly enough, when we talk about the causes, we hear a lot of different things. And I mean, for someone being outside and talking and communicating to people, many times we have discussions and people say, oh, we already know what the cause is. But then you try to ask questions, you realize there are things, people talk about. So what is the cause? Droughts, climate change, dams, natural cycle? Is it like, this is something happening naturally? It's the upstream water diversion and use, land use changes, groundwater mining and upstream. Some say there's no relation between groundwater and what's happening with the lake. Bad management, lack of foresight, and so on. But so which one of these? And people have different opinions, and these are people who come from the same discipline. They might be all hydrologists and having different opinions. There are people who don't study but have beliefs, right? And then there are politicians who try to blame the problem on different issues. So it is hard to understand what the cause is, although anytime we sit down and talk about solving Lake Urmia problem, we all assume that we know the cause. Of course, the cause is probably all of the above. Like all of these things are linked, and it's really hard to disaggregate the effects and say this particular item has had so much effects on the status of the lake. So that's another issue, and we cannot know exactly. We won't know. We might come up with studies and estimations, but it's really hard to find out what's going on. Why? Because these are a couple of human natural systems. They're super complex. I always use this figure to teach. When I talk about a couple of human natural systems, and these systems are super complex, right? There are all these nodes and connections and so on. And anytime we want to study, those of us who are like disciplinary scientists, probably we're focusing on a small node like this. Those of us who claim to be very interdisciplinary, the furthest we go is somewhere here, right? We cannot really go further than that, and we have to make assumptions about the rest of the system and what's going on here and there. But these are complex systems. They're interacting all the time, they're dynamic, they're changing, evolving. As soon as we try to fix our science, we realize there's another change in the system. And most importantly, they're dealing with multiple agents. So we have a lot of agents who make decisions and create externalities for each other. So that's one thing which makes the problem tough. So these are the things I want to discuss. So why can't we solve the problem, right? As I said, we think we know the problem, what the problem is about, and we know what the solution is about. And we know that there's a government who wants to solve the problem, a president who promised to solve the problem in his campaign, a task force which is committed with solving the problem. So all of these things are there, like why can we solve it? And so you know, I'm going to focus probably on what I think are the major barriers to solving the problem. The first thing, in my opinion, is the narrative issue, right? Those of us who do conflict resolution, we know that one of the major issues we have in solving problems of this kind is that each party has its own narrative, right? We have scientists who have different narratives, and even if the scientists can agree, then don't expect the farmers to buy your words, don't expect the locals to buy your words. So everyone thinks there is something wrong. I mean, something, and then they give more weight to one of these causes that we discussed. So that although we sit in the same room, and although we think we know the problem, we cannot agree on the main causes. And that's hard. It's like a sick, a patient you have in the room, and there are like 5 doctors who want to cure the patient, and each doctor thinks something is wrong. I mean, a different thing is wrong. So how can you cure this patient with a limited budget, a limited effort? And this is an expensive surgery. It might be an irreversible surgery. It's like, you want to cut something, you want to take, cut a leg or do something. And it's not an easy thing to see. We can do it with trial and error. So narrative is one of the things which we really need to work on, especially the scientific community, which I think in case of Lake Urmia have been very opinionated. They haven't tried hard enough to go and do the fact checking. We all have these different studies. One study says climate change is the cause, one study says drought is the cause, another study says there is no relation between drought and what's happening, and so on. And all of these are published material, scientifically published material, and they're coming out of universities. So what are we going to do with that? And the other thing is, okay, a basic question: who manages the system, right? And I always ask this in classes. So who manages water? And people always, the first response is Ministry of Water, or like Water Authority, or this and that. Well, in the basin of that, with that size, we have 3 provinces. We have the Ministry of Energy in charge of everything, and then the Ministry of this and Ministry of that, and the Department of Environment, and then farmers, and then locals, and then all of these people who make decisions. So we're dealing with a multi-participant, multi-objective system, and the problem is really hard to solve when you have these people who might have a lot of different narratives, right? So we heard something about these problems being zero-sum. Yes, they sound zero-sum as long as we want to stay in the water work, as long as we talk about volumes, as long as we talk about allocation. So you get something and I do something. But these problems should not be about that, because we know that we all use water for something. No one needs, we're not talking about lack of drinking water in the basin, right? It's about food, it's about energy production, ecosystem, land use, and economy and society and politics and culture. I mean, we're talking about a basin which has a high political pressure on the government. And one of the reasons that the government is so interested in solving the problem is the political pressure on the government. So all of these things are tied to a problem of this kind, and it's even tougher when we have this situation. On the positive side, when water is linked to so many things, you would think that naturally you can look for trade opportunities and win-win solutions, because you can trade food for something else, for money. But that's another issue that we have in this system, because we have self-optimizing attitudes, right? Although Azerbaijanis are in love with Lake Urmia, they want this problem to be solved tomorrow. They blame the central government for not paying attention. Some are even being extreme, saying that this has been intentional, like conspiracy theory and all that. But at the end of the day, can you ask all the Azerbaijanis to stop farming tomorrow because we want to save the lake? Can you ask them to shut down their let the trees die because things are as are at the moment? And that's one of the things. I mean, Azerbaijanis who love this might not be willing to cut back from their profit or benefit or whatever you name it for the lake. And so this makes a problem tough. Classical tragedy of the common problem. It's an old problem. The technical solution is there. We know what to do. We know, like, you know, through command and control, we might be able to solve the problem, but you have to have a carrot if you want to use a stick. What is the carrot? What can you offer in this problem? And I wanted to actually think about this. I wanted to use California Delta problem as an example to just remind ourselves that this problem is not about Iran. It's not about like bad management in Iran. It's not about bad people in Iran. And, you know, when the institutions are not designed properly, it doesn't matter where in the world they are, and it doesn't matter how good of a person you are if they put you in charge of an institution. As someone in charge of an institution, you have to be rational and try to maximize the utility of the institution and follow some goal, you know, pursue some goals. And you do the same no matter, like, you know, the institution does the same no matter who's in charge. I mean, some people are more of a, you know, risk takers, some are more conservative, but at the end of the day, you do the same thing. So what's happening in Iran has happened elsewhere. I mean, we have the discussion of, like, you know, 4 other lakes are, you know, of similar condition in the United States. California Delta, which I have worked a lot on, is another example of a system of this kind, that, you know, water transfers were done. 2/3 of California's water is supplied from California Delta, and lots of environmental issues. The whole Southern California relies on this water. California's Central Valley agriculture relies on this water. Now what are we going to do? I mean, the system is a little bit different because people can have lawsuits and play with it, with the game. And then there's a market which increases the efficiency of the system. But at the end of the day, you have an ecosystem which is dying. Currently, there's a drought. It's affecting ecosystem. It doesn't matter if it's California or Iran. System is going bad, and the situation is bad. So the state of California decided that we want to solve this problem. What are we going to do? Like, you know, we have a task force in the Iran. In the U.S., in California, CalFed was some sort of a task force. The same thing. We invest in this institution. This institution brings all the stakeholders together, and they come up with voluntary actions to solve the problem. Billions of dollars spent, no solution, no resolution. Why? Because people have their self-interest. They are concerned about their own things. So one of the things we discuss in negotiations and problems of this is the issue of negotiations versus substance. We pay too much attention on coming up with agreements and doing this and doing that without thinking about substance. So the issue we have in the CalFed problem and California problem, where we faced a major failure and still we cannot solve the problem without California interfering directly, was the issue of substance. You have to offer something and trade something for something else, right? You can say we will have a or the following, you know, policy that was offered by the task force, and immediately there was a strong reaction against this. You know, parliament members were really mad, and, like, you know, all this pressure, people having conspiracy theories, mistrunks and all that, because they didn't think, no, trading water for money is a reasonable thing. They didn't know if this will continue or, like, you know, what they're going to lose. They were unsure about the problem. So not necessarily what you can offer will solve the problem. So that's another thing, that in this basin, in this lake, one issue is the substance issue, that we might not have the right substance to offer to those who make decisions to change behavior. So in order to do that, you know, one example, I think Dr. Mourid mentioned this, that you have to create jobs, for example, if you want the farmers to behave differently. You have to offer something better, right? It's easy to say that Iran should shut down its agriculture because 90% of the water is going to the agricultural sector. It's easy to say that in California as well, but nothing like that is going to happen, because that's the social problem, that's the political problem. If I'm the government, I prefer Lake Urmia to go dry rather than me, like, you know, losing power, right? So it's the same thing. So who should be trading what with who? So who should be offering? And in this problem, it seems that government, the central government, is the only one who should be paying, and the central government has a lot of other things to deal with. One other thing which is problematic, it's not only the narrative of what was the cause of the problem, but also the narrative about the solution, right? We have all these solutions which are coming out, and task force suggests all these solutions and items to be done. But not necessarily people have the right perception of what you suggest as a solution. As an expert, you think fallowing is the right thing to do. As soon as you say fallowing, then people get crazy about it because they think the farmer's right are gone, you're trying to make Iran dependent on imports for food, violating food security, and things like that. So marketing and branding and packaging is another thing which I don't think they have paid attention to in Iran, and it's not, again, unique to Iran. California example, 1982, a solution was proposed, I got it. A solution was proposed, and that solution was, peripheral canal, and then there were strong opposition. Just recently, they're selling the same thing under a different name with some modifications. It's the same thing, but for many years, people were not allowed to talk about. So that's another thing, like what we are offering is not necessarily what people, what we define or what we suggest does not always come across in the right way. So, if you're saying farmers empowerment, this might have a different meaning from saying farmers should stop business. Like as soon as you say agricultural sector should get smaller in Iran, people go crazy. Or as soon as you say agricultural sector should use less water, people get crazy. But you can't say, with less water, we can still make more profit. That might be something to argue and discuss. So I say what you see. I mean, these funny figures that what you see, what they see, what you offer as a good might be perceived as a bad, or what you see as crap might be good for others because they have stakes. They have stakeholders. There are stakeholders who prefer to grow their trees and do their business as they're doing. So whatever you come up with, your allocation rules or cutback rules, and all these things seem unfair to them, and it makes sense. It's always the case. Doesn't matter if we're the stakeholder or not. I mean, this is something to accept. So that takes us to another important concept that, again, we have been working on is the issue of optimality versus stability. When engineers, I'm an engineer too, so when we try to solve problems, we think about what's perfect for the system, we do this and we do that, we transfer water, we stop this, and we stop pumping, and we do this, and we do. But the issue is like we always go for the best, we always go for the optimal, we always want to do what's best for the system without thinking about the individuals and what they might like and what they might want to do, right? And in that case, the issue we face is that the solution that we have is optimal, but it's not feasible because the perception of the stakeholders is different. So stability versus optimality is another thing that we have missed, I think, and it's another barrier to implementation of solution in this space. And so looking at how water management has evolved around the world is, pre-World War II, we're all about engineering, and then engineering got it. Engineering and economics, and then engineering, economics, and environment. So, we were somewhere there when we were building all these dams and canals and irrigation channels, and we have done it. It's not easy to get rid of dams, and it's not, once you put things in place, once you build the city of Los Angeles, you cannot ask people to move out. And it's the same thing in Iran. We cannot we cannot destroy the dams, right? Now we're becoming more environmental friendly because we saw the damages. But the issue is that we have to care about the social. I mean, in the 80s, others have done it, and in Iran, we still have to do it, and we are fall very behind. So we're still in a phase that we're starting to think about the environment without understanding this. And the social aspect of the problem is important, and that's something I hope you can address and discuss in your workshop. And the other things we have is economic instability and high inflation rate. When you have such a situation in the country, it is absolutely rational to maximize the short-term benefits. So you have to understand that it's, with any economic model, if you use, they suggest that you maximize the current benefits. And if the country is going through sanctions, you have economic instability, then people will become short-term maximizers. So, and the other issue I want to discuss is when the Lake Urmia tragedy happened, it was very new. It was something which, like we all had our heart in. It was tragic, like made you cry. But then we had Zayan Daru. we have Khuzestan, we have Lake Hamoun, and then we have, Tehran air quality. And after a while, people become insensitive to what happens. I mean, that's something I'm worried about because we keep talking about water crisis and we keep telling people that in summer they're not going to have water. Last year didn't happen, this year won't happen, next year people lose sensitivity. Government also lose sensitivity because these things are happening all over the country. So extremes are good when they're really extremes. Once the extreme is happening in a lot of places, in a drought, flood, whatever, you become insensitive to it. Like, they killed one person in the United States, it's all over, it's all over the news. Hundreds of people are getting killed every day in Iraq and Syria. No one talks about it because in that region, people are used to so many people getting killed. So the urgency and importance of issues for the government is dependent on what's happening, what people think, and then lots of other problems that the country needs to deal with. So Lake Urmia again goes to the lower priority, then there's some pressure, there's reaction. There is some rain, it goes away. And it's absolutely the same all over the place, all over the world. So last slide, do we have any solution? Yes, it doesn't mean that we cannot have any solution, but it's not necessarily physical. It's not about moving water, stopping groundwater use with this and that, and it's not necessarily short term, and I think it's not short term. Like, we have to think about investment in industry, but that's not going to change the deal in the near future. And we might lose a lake like this. It might have been, turning point in Iran's environmental history, that losing this lake for the sake of other things in the country. But it's sad, but it's true. So costs are not necessarily economic. The political and social cost is so high that even you can't balance it against the economic cost of it and lose it. So status quo is still beneficial to many parties, and unless you understand that, you cannot design a solution. So, it's not necessarily top priority. So because the institutions are not in place, I know Mahdi and Ojad are also working on these things, that, water governance is another thing that we need to fix in that country, and we need to work on it. Without that, it's really hard to get a solution. And again and again and again, don't forget, this is not specific to Iran. It doesn't belong to this government or the previous administration or the previous regime. It's something which has been there, wrong institutions or inappropriate institutions, and the problem would appear in the same way for our groundwater, for other systems as well. So I hope these discussions would help you or make your mind busy about thinking about some other stuff that to be included in your discussions later on today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kaveh, for your so nice presentation about some parts of complexity in Urmia Lake. Now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Shafiq to give his presentation entitled as Can Water Diplomacy Framework, a reframing of complex water allocation problem for Urmia Lake. After Shafiq's presentation, we move to the last section of today's workshop, and we will have the second part of our roundtable discussion.
So welcome. I hope you had a good lunch. And thank you, Kaveh. That was wonderful. Really gave me a wonderful opportunity really to dive in. So before I dive into the narrative gap, let me share a story, I think, because it's all about stories. So the story is about a very interesting Iranian movie that I have watched a long time ago, and it still stuck to me. The movie, The Children of Heaven. And actually many of you have watched it. That movie is really about a pair of shoes. I don't think anything could be as mundane as it is, but it basically kept me stuck for 2 hours. So the brother really, so he loses shoes for his sister, and he goes into all kinds of adventure to find their shoes. And then he doesn't find it, then he goes into something else to win that shoe. And I'll not tell you what those are, but I think it has extreme relevance to Urmia Lake. We're looking for all kinds of solutions and we may not find it. Like that brother could not find shoes for his sister, but he found something else. If you look at the movie, and that is exactly what we are looking for. We're looking for some creative options that do not exist. Unless we do this, really we're stuck. I think what Kaveh very nicely pointed out, these are not new problems. These problems exist almost anywhere. Whether it's water problem, it's a poverty alleviation problem, it's an education problem, these are all complex problems. So what we will try to do for next half an hour or so, I'll try to reorient our thinking, bringing in this idea of complexity little bit more precisely. Because we all talk about complexity, Obama talks about complexity, even Jon Stewart in his funny show, he also talks about complexity. We talk about complexity, my friend Variam, complexity guru, he talks about complexity. These are very different meaning of complexity. So we want to basically precisely define this. Before we can do anything, I think one thing if you got from Kaveh is that unless we can define the problem a little bit more precisely, we cannot simply look for solutions. Otherwise you can come up with solutions, those are irrelevant. So what does that mean? That means essentially this idea of reframing these complex water challenges. So I will emphasize two things. One, what do I mean by reframing and what do I mean by complexity? First we talk about complexity and then we go into reframing. So this is the story. And I have shown this picture now quite some time and I keep doing this. So if you look at really, we have this indicator that measures. And this is the group that most of us really were from the engineering camp. Yeah, we know exactly how to measure. I know how much is the water loss. There's the numbers, guys. Then this mother and child case, let me tell you a story. These are the narratives group. And there is a disconnect between these numbers and narratives. And that is the fundamental cause of complexity. So in the groups who are talking about narratives, they're talking about narratives. The group who are talking about numbers, they're talking about numbers. And they talk to each other, but not in the same language. So how do I use narratives which are consistent with the numbers and vice versa? And perhaps solution is not in either or. Numbers will not solve the problem, narratives will also not solve the problem. So what will? So then I would argue that no, I think so at least we have some clue, and we will give you some clue from water diplomacy framework, at least start addressing those problems. I am very careful in telling that solving the problem. We are not going to solve the problem. So let's be very clear about that. We will address this problem to resolve it at a level that is little bit better than what it is right now. If you ask me that can you solve the problem of Urmia Lake? No. I think Dr. Mori already based on his experience from the US, he said that no, it is not a lake restoration problem. It is a redefining the ecological services problem. That is a very interesting reframing of the problem. You are not going to restore the lake to its 1970 level. That will simply not happen. But many things can happen. So how that happen is essentially the conversation that we hope we'll have for next 2 hours. So I go back to my original slide that I started with. So essentially in doing this really, we start with values. What are the values I am trying to promote really? Is it really the sustainability of the lake? Is it really the livelihood of the farmers? Is it really that I want to bring in another 2 or 3 billion cubic meter of water? What is this? And why am I doing this? If that question is not clear, we cannot talk about tools or the solution. So that is the first thing that we need to recognize. So it's very important really how we think about this problem, rather than trying to do this way. At the same time, I am very mindful of what David suggested in the morning. Look, we are here outsider and we can give you some general solutions. Those are not going to be specifically applicable to Urmia Lake. What we could provide really is a framework, is a way of thinking about this problem with some specific examples. If you ask me really, no, give me a prescription really how I will going to solve my diabetes problem. Diabetes was a very good example that Dr. Morit made. Diabetes is not going to be solved, at least not now. Knowing what we know about medical science, diabetes needs to be managed. That is very different. It is not like a broken leg. Broken leg can be fixed. That's a solvable problem. Diabetes is a problem that needs to be managed. So we need to understand what is the diagnosis of the disease is. If the disease is diabetes, then please do not try to solve the problem. Try to manage this. So start eating less sugar, take insulin, whatever you need to do. So that is where essentially tool is very important. So the first thing that we need to do is to diagnose the problem. What is the problem? And we tried to do this. I think David was trying to force our Iranian colleagues to look at, tell us really what is the real bottleneck? What is the main crisis? And we're still not getting there. We need to get there, at least closer to that space. What are the key problems really? 1 or 2, at least those are understandable that these are the bottlenecks. Otherwise, there are too many problems. And too many problems, then too many solutions, we'll be talking the same thing another 5 years. Not going to go very far. So, in our mind, we look at 3 types of problems. So there are simple problems, there are complicated problems, and there are complex problems. So let me give you an example. Simple problem is like here. So I bring it to water, is flushing a toilet. Very well done. Right now you can go and buy a toilet really with less than 1 gallon per flush. Very well done, engineered system. Cause effects are known. Here I go and put on the switch, light comes out. Whether I'm in Iran or in Boston or in Bangladesh, doesn't matter. We know exactly what the cause and effects are, so the problem is simple. Then I get into a complicated problem, meaning that I have some water in Quaban Reservoir, I have to get water 18th floor of my apartment building, hot water in the morning. It's a complicated problem. But we have done it. We have sent people to the moon. That is also a complicated problem. Why? Because we know exactly how to send them and bring them back. So it's a complicated problem, it's an engineering problem, very well defined problem. The problem becomes complex really when Boston decided that it needs to grow, so it needs more water. Where will it go? It went 50 miles west to Quaban Reservoir. The Quaban Reservoir was created in 1940s. It was the largest man-made reservoir at that time, not now. There are many more right now, but at that time it was the largest man-made reservoir. By doing that, we have eliminated 4 villages. Did Boston have the right to eliminate 4 villages because Boston wanted to grow? That is not a scientific question. That is a question of value. What values? So we said that no, Boston is more important than those 4 villages. Those people stayed there for years together. Same thing will apply really for the farmers in the Urmia lake. Who has the right really to eliminate them or ask them to do something else? So it has to be discussed by them for their own interest. So that is very important. In that case, problem become complex. So it is no longer a scientific question. It is a question of science, society, and politics all combined. So when all of these things combined, things are extremely messy. It is complex. So that complexity is also very well understood because you have seen Kabe said this, Shurush also mentioned that, and we have heard it, that these are all interlinked processes. Fine, understood. Then what? So that is where I think we are, then what is the question we are trying to ask? So if you put this really in this very simplistic way, so there are known problems. Known problems meaning that there are cause-effect relationships are known. So this is what I call simple problems, like flushing a toilet. Then I have knowable problems. Cause and effects are known but not fully known. So getting water from a reservoir to your house on 18th floor. It's a complicated problem. Sending someone to the moon is a complicated problem. It's knowable. There are some uncertainty, it can be addressed. Then you have complex problems where cause effects are not really understood. We just don't know what does what. And that is where, so a good example would be raising a child. It's a complex problem really. I can tell you that so see, I'll give you $200,000, I want my daughter to be an astrophysicist. There is simply no way to guarantee this. Because you put an input and the system changes. That system is the child. And that is the inherent problem with the complex systems. So that means the cause effects are very difficult to understand. Then you have chaos. I hope we are not in a chaotic situation. If you have a chaotic situation, like for example, the example would be, suddenly there is a fire, I don't need to know what the cause is, I go out and try to save my life. So that is it. I hope we are not in that situation right now for Urmia Lake. Urmia Lake most likely we are in the complex domain, but we know there is a problem, but we don't know exactly what is causing it and how to address this. So with that lens, I said, let's try to understand what complexity means. So what is the theory? So we put it in a very simple term. Since I said, okay, I have lot of 2 axes, one is certainty, another is consensus. If I have lot of certainty, lot of consensus, I am in a simple domain. When we were trained in school, we were really trained in that domain. Look, tell me what the cause effects are, let me tell you what the Newton's laws are, I'll solve the problem. These are simple problems. Simple problems have rational decision making. That we do optimization, we do cost maximization, or whatever we're doing, simple problems. Then we go to complicated domain because we know what the science is, but we're not sure. And there are some concerns that we want to do this, but the certainty is not very high. Other end, we may have lot of consensus, but not much certainty. But most of the problems that we are dealing with, neither we have certainty, nor we have consensus. The Shurush told you basically, in January, you could not have made prediction for March. We made prediction with 20 best models, still we made it wrong. So that means certainty is not there. Now, if I'm a politician, I say, look, if you cannot agree on science, why don't you go and spend some time next 5 years to define your model? Very valid argument, and you may do that. But I would argue that that is something that simply science also cannot solve. Because climate models, thousands of people are working for many, many years. We still have certain bound in terms of even scientific uncertainty that simply cannot be resolved. Forget about social uncertainty. So we talk about different types of uncertainty. Some uncertainties simply cannot be resolved because the science is not there. So that is where we are right now. So complexity can come from either lack of certainty or lack of consensus. And these, to put it simply, one comes from the natural domain and another comes from the societal domain. And then of course you have political spin. Then in practice what you do, you have to make decisions. Whether there is certainty or not, whether consensus or not, you still make decisions. Those decisions are really framed now either rational, and that is most of the things are, and that is most of the way we are trained, so we make rational decisions. But if the problems are simple, if the problems are complex, and I am making simple decisions, then I am basically treating the diabetes with a problem that simply cannot be solved. If it's a broken leg problem, it's a simple problem, you solve it with a surgeon, do a surgery, you're done. If you have diabetes, you're in a different domain. Your prescription has to be different than a simple prescription. That's where we are. So what we want to basically think about is that, what is the prescription? But before the prescription, I need the diagnosis. See, if the diagnosis is a complex problem, then the question is, of course, everything is connected with everything else. Then what do I do? So then here we come. This is the current framing. So you have a basin boundary, you have ecological boundary, you have a lake boundary. That is the way we think about this. But these boundaries are somewhat physical. Then you have jurisdictional boundary. There are 3 provinces. And the plot that Jim showed you this morning, these are hierarchical of levels nested at different levels. And someone else basically reminded us, clearly, I think you did that, in Iran it is not only one level of decision making, it is nested in other levels of decision making, which are also interlinked. If these are interlinked and if they are not aligned properly, no matter how hard you try, it will not work. So to give you a very simple example, contextual here, this is the building, is our library. This library goes in the middle of 2 cities. One side is Somerville, another side is Medford. I got ticket because I parked on the other side of the town because it was in Medford side. So Medford side has a different rule of traffic than in Somerville side. It's the same university. It just we happen to be that we have the same jurisdictional boundary going across the library. So what it means really that even in the same university, 2 different cities have 2 different rules. You get ticket in one side, you get ticket on the other side. These we need to understand. Unless those are aligned properly, no matter how brilliant your engineering solution is, it's not going to work. So then I looked at just 2 pictures. This is from a paper really. See, if you want to know, try to understand this system, look at this, what is going on. This is just, top one is the hydrologic system, bottom one is the socio-economic system. And we are saying here, most of us are here in the same group, that we need to couple them. Look how many links and nodes are there. And these are done by one group, and if I draw, I'll probably draw differently. So as a result, this is really a very spaghetti-like diagram. Remember the diagram that I showed you. And this spaghetti is not new. So let me show you another spaghetti. Before I do that, I think just want to show you what are the sources of uncertainty. I took this picture just to make few cases about Urmia. Now, if you look at this really, from 1973 to say 1995, rainfall was pretty high, runoff was pretty good, and then runoff decreased significantly. Rainfall really did not change very much. So that means the lake flow has gone down. Now I can argue the lake flow has gone down because agricultural use has gone up. That is one hypothesis I can do, and I can basically make a case. From this diagram, I cannot make a case for climate change. Why I cannot? Because if you look at the change in rainfall, is not very much. Change in runoff, on the other hand, is quite substantial. If you look at what is going on here, so like, look at here, this is the runoff reduction from here to here, rainfall only reduced this much. So that means rainfall is what is to change if there is a climate change. So that change, of course, there is, but it's not much. The change in runoff is much higher. So we need to understand what is the cause of that change. So although we're talking about climate change, it may be not really placed properly. Climate change is a contributor, but it may not be the main contributor. So that is what we need to understand first. Now if you look at the distribution of rainfall, it is also quite interesting. This is what I borrowed from one of Madhi's paper. Now, of course, these two scales are different. So again, it's problematic because here you have million cubic meter, here millimeter. We are not using water at the same time. So we don't have much water in June, July, August, but we're using a lot of it. But then we have a lot of storage here. So there is an asymmetric distribution going on. So there is a time shift that can happen. Is it the cause? I do not know because I did not have time to look at this idea of actual how to convert this millimeter to million cubic meters. So we need to be consistent about the units. Then if you look at this one here, this is again another source of uncertainty. Look at last 1966 to 2008. If you look at the red diagram, that is for precipitation, it's not changing very much. So precipitation from year to year, although we are claiming that there is a climate change, and there is something that even a report says that there is severe drought going on for the last 50 years, but I don't see it in the data. So either this data is not correct or their assertion is not correct. So we need to understand really whether the narratives that we are using, are they consistent with the numbers that we have. Otherwise we can keep on claiming based on very limited or uncertain information and not go very far. At least we should be consistent in what we say, can it be validated. I don't see any significant change in rainfall from year to year. The red line, if you look at 2008, is close to the zero line. So the way this is plotted is basically zero should tell you that there is no change. Either is +1 is significant positive change, -1 is significant negative change. On the other hand, water level is going down. That part is very certain. That we know. The water level in the lake is going down and quite substantially after 1999. Now we need to find out what are the cause of that drop is. Is it rainfall? Is it precipitation? Is it climate change? What is this? And that is the fundamental question we need to ask. Then I argue that, look, I think this type of uncertainty really is not going to go away. There are at least three types of uncertainty. First one is the uncertainty information. If I cannot even agree really whether precipitation is changing substantially, that's an information uncertainty. That uncertainty is related to hydrologic cycle, can be solved by putting money, putting rain gauges and so on. Then the question of uncertainty of actions, meaning that what do I have to do to expect what? That's an action uncertainty. Even if I do really, even if I eliminate all the farmers, will it solve the problem? If I start basically renting out lands, is it going to solve the problem? Those are the action uncertainty. Then of course we have uncertainty of perception. Meaning that you may say anything you want, but I want to hear whatever I want to hear. I want to hear that basically the problem really is with climate change. I don't have anything to back it up, but that's what I think. That's a perception problem. And that perception problem really simply cannot be solved by information or action. You need to develop awareness, you have to bring in people and show them, look, what you're saying doesn't make any sense. Still he or she may not agree. That's a perception problem. That is also an uncertainty. The question is basically, what is the source of uncertainty that is plugging the problem in Urmia Lake? Is it information? Is it action? Is it perception? Unless we identify, we can be very scientific that 1/3 each. Not very good. Uncertainty of information may be more problematic than uncertainty of perception. If you go to California, there is no lack of information really. We have as much data as we want. But the problem that we have with the subsidy that we have created, that we have created some water rights, those are about 100 years old, people are not going to give them up. So although we know what the solution is, it is not politically feasible. See, the solutions are not politically feasible, you may talk about the solution, but it's not going to be very actionable. So you need to understand where is the bottleneck. Is it in the action, information, or perception? And at least have some consensus about that. What will be useful for us really at least to go there. See, if we, as a group, we can decide that, look, I think it looks like Urmia Lake has some uncertainty in information because we don't know really how much rainfall is there or how much water flow is there. Then that problem is a little bit easier to solve. Then the uncertainty perception problem. So then I come here. So this is a diagram that I want to show you. So this is a diagram many of you have seen. This was done, and it was offered to a US general in Afghanistan in the morning. A briefing like Urmia Lake briefing going on. So they wanted to do one thing. They want to increase popular support for US Army in Afghan population. So that is that popular support. They have done many things. Look at the type of things, the tribal governance, coalition domestic support, tactical support, military intervention, narcotics, and these are all different activities that they have designed, and US has spent billions of dollars with the intention that I want to increase popular support for US government from our Afghan people. That's a very focused question, and this is what he was given. And he's seriously in trouble. So now, what do I do with this? This is what I, see, this is too complex, I will not go there, so I hope this will work. So I want you to listen to this 3 minutes clip, which talks about this in a little bit more intelligent way than I can. So let's see. The sound on? So 3 minutes, it's not very long. Good, he's coming. See what I can do.
Well, I hope to change that in less than 3 minutes. So I hope to convince you that complex doesn't always equal complicated. So for me, a well-crafted baguette fresh out of the oven is complex. But a curry, onion, green olive, poppy cheese bread is complicated. I'm an ecologist and I study complexity. I love complexity. And I study that in the natural world, the interconnectedness of species. So here's a food web, or a map of feeding links between species that live in alpine lakes in the mountains of California. And this is what happens to that food web when it's stocked with non-native fish that never lived there before. All the grayed out species disappear, some are actually on the brink of extinction. And lakes with fish have more mosquitoes, even though they eat them. These effects are all unanticipated, and yet we're discovering they're predictable. So I want to share with you a couple key insights about complexity we're learning from studying nature that maybe are applicable to other problems. First is this, the simple power of good visualization tools to help untangle complexity and just encourage you to ask questions you didn't think of before. For example, you could plot the flow of carbon through a...
It's a complex problem.
We can disconnect that one for now. Okay, fine.
The next thing is that if you want
The voice,
or the interconnections of habitat patches for endangered species in Yosemite National Park. The next thing is that if you want to predict the effect of one species on another, if you focus on only that link and then you black box the rest, it's actually less predictable than if you step back, consider the entire system, all the species, all the links, and from that place, hone in on the sphere of influence that matters most. And we're discovering with our research that's often very local to the node you care about, within 1 or 2 degrees. So the more you step back, embrace complexity, the better chance you have of finding simple answers, and it's often different than the simple answer that you started with. So let's switch gears and look at a really complex problem, courtesy of the US government. This is a diagram of the US counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan. It was front page of the New York Times a couple months ago, instantly ridiculed by the media for being so crazy complicated. And the stated goal was to increase popular support for the Afghan government. Clearly a complex problem, but is it complicated? Well, when I saw this in front page of the Times, I thought, great, finally something I can relate to. You know, this is, I can sink my teeth into this. So let's do it. So here you go, for the first time ever, a world premiere view of this spaghetti diagram as an ordered network. The circled node is the one we're trying to influence, popular support for the government. And so now we can look 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees away from that node and eliminate like 3/4 of the diagram outside that sphere of influence. Within that sphere, most of those nodes are not actionable, like the harshness of the terrain, and a very small minority are actual military actions. Most are nonviolent, and they fall into 2 broad categories. Active engagement with ethnic rivalries and religious beliefs, and fair, transparent economic development and provisioning of services. I don't know about this, but this is what I can decipher from this diagram in 24 seconds. When you see a diagram like this, I don't want you to be afraid, I want you to be excited, I want you to be relieved, because simple answers may emerge. We're discovering in nature that simplicity often lies on the other side of complexity. So for any problem, the more you can zoom out and embrace complexity, the better chance you have of zooming in on the simple details that matter most. Thank you.
All right, so you found out that this is a complex problem, but the solution could be really simple. So the key here is not to get paralyzed by this complexity, because there are many things which are interlinked, and these nodes and links are not going to go away. So what will cause what is not really easily answerable question. What we want to do really, we want to embrace this complexity, but then with a purpose. That what am I trying to solve? Here the purpose was to increase popular support. Terrain is not important, it's not going to change the terrain. Military action is not going to do it. So we need to eliminate some of the things that are not actionable for that particular problem that I'm interested in. So this is what the key problem is. It's not that we do not understand that the Urmia Lake problem is a complex problem. It is a complex problem. The question is not that. Question is that if this is a complex problem, what is the source of the complexity? Is this complexity coming from uncertainty of information? Is it coming from uncertainty of action or uncertainty of perception? Ultimately, any decision making is about the future, and future is uncertain. We know it. That is not good enough. The challenge and the creativity is to find out what is the source of uncertainty that I can address. Just telling me that I tell my students that look, only certainty you have once you're born that you will die. There is no other certainty really there. Everything else in between really is adaptive and flexible. You have no idea really what will happen. I had no idea really you guys will be here. For example, an Iranian group will come here in July 2015. It happened mostly because I think Mahdi and Hujjat is here. And they came here because they wanted to spend some time here, and then we knew Shurush, and then it happened. So this is fairly unpredictable. And hopefully this unpredictability will lead to something else, that you will go back and try to influence your government, and then we'll get more involved and maybe bring in something that was not there. So this is the way most of the complex system becomes adaptive and actionable. So it has to happen, certain things have to happen. If this did not happen, next steps will not happen. So right now I don't know what will happen, nothing may happen, but there is a likelihood that some of the things will come out of this workshop that will lead to something else, and it will keep on going. With the idea that we're not going to solve the problem, but at least we are going to address the problem a little bit more intelligently than it was done before. So that brings us to basically our framework. So this is what we promoted in our water diplomacy framework. That look, there are two types of problems, two domains. One is the natural domain, where you have water quality, water quantity, and ecosystems. In the other domain, you have governance, assets, and norms and values. These are natural domain and societal domain, and they happen in a politically real world. So essentially what is going on really, you have natural variables, you have societal variables, a 3 and 3, I made them very simple, and then they happen in a politically real world. But we are arguing that all of these three things are coupled. So these are three domains, they are intricately coupled, and not in all situations everything is coupled. For example, for Urmia Lake, water quantity may be coupled with the governance, maybe with assets, perhaps not with ecosystem, maybe with ecosystems. We need to see really what those couplings are. What those nodes are. These 6 you can think of, these are nodes, and they are connected. How they are connected will be, again, we need to make a distinction between water and water resources. Water is an object, water resources is something that people have to make decisions. So water as an object is like hydrogen and oxygen, it has no soul. Water resources have soul, because now who has more right? Is fish more important than the farmer? Is agriculture more important than urban development? These are questions of water resources. Then we come to this idea of analysis and process that Kaveh was trying to allude to. The process is what the narratives are, but analysis is what the substance are. It is not either or. I can create as much substance as I want, but if I do not agree really why that analysis is done, the process is very important. So we need the process as well as analysis both. If we do this really, then we're saying that we need to make some distinction between domains, scales, and levels that basically Jim was showing in the morning. Those levels could be quite important, scales could be quite important too. Is it a 2-year problem or is it a 5-year problem? Government will get elected in 4 years, climate change is a 50-year problem. These are all mismatched scales. I'm sure Rouhani is not interested in a 50-year problem because he needs to get re-elected in 2 years. So there has to be short-term gain, unless he wants to create legacy. Legacy is a different story. Like for example, Obama wants to create legacy by doing alliance with Cuba right now, because that's the way he wants to be remembered. So legacy is a different type of motivation than solving short-term problems and long-term problems. And then we want to make a distinction between these three things: watershed, problem shed, and policy shed. Watershed is what most of us are interested in. We talk about lake has a watershed. But that watershed may not be aligned with the problem shed. Problem could be salinity in the lake. That salinity may come from something else. Or the policy may be really, it is the national policy versus the provincial policy. So depending on really what you are working with, these three sheds, watershed, problem shed, and policy shed must align. If they don't align, this will be the problem with like Medford and Somerville that I gave you, that I get ticket for parking. So that means the policy shed is not aligned with my problem. My problem was that I wrongfully parked because in a wrong side of the street. So these, unless they're aligned properly, you cannot solve the problem. So now let's see whether how do we reframe this. Now when you have this, first thing you need to define that what is the domain I'm interested in. Is the problem coming from the natural domain, coming from the societal domain, or from the political domain, or a coupling of all three? At what scale? Is it really the scale of the lake, or scale of the basin, scale of 3 provinces, or scale of Iran, or the whole globe? These are different scales. Am I interested in next year, 5 years, 50 years? That's another scale. That's a temporal scale. So unless I know at what scale I want to intervene, I cannot do this. Then there are levels. Levels means, is it the provincial level of government, is it the national level of government, or is it at the farmer's level? The farmer has to survive. Farmer has to basically make a livelihood. That's an individual level decision, is very much controlled by what happens at the national level. So these are all very interlinked processes. Unless we define really how these links are connected, we cannot start prescribing solutions. Once I have that, then of course you need to talk about this watershed, problem shed, policy should align for Urmia Lake. So our challenge essentially to how do I align them properly so that it is a coherent set. Otherwise, I can basically solve one particular problem without understanding the spaghetti diagram that you have seen for Afghanistan. We have spent over $100 billion. It still could not go very far because we are doing all kinds of interesting things at one scale that has no relevance to other scale. So if the intention is to provide ecological services for the Urmia Lake, it is quite different than restoring the lake at 1970 level. So first we need to agree really at what do we want to do. Is it the lake restoration is the main goal? Then it's a very different problem. Then trying to optimize, for example, the ecological services given the constraints that we have. So when we say that water is not a fixed resource, it's a flexible resource. How do I create flexibility is the key for the water diplomacy. And we are saying that this is a network, it's not a system. Network of different links and nodes, and it is continuously changing. And that change now have uncertainty, variability, non-linearity, and everything else. And these are not external. We need to be very careful that these are not external, they are inherent of the system itself. By uncertainty, I affect the decision that I make. And then, of course, what we are proposing that these problems simply do not have any unique solutions. The solution has to be adaptive and has to be jointly negotiated by the people who are affected by it. And I made it very clear that we are trying to resolve this problem with a non-zero sum approaches. So we want to create mutual gains that do not exist right now by involving the people who are affected by it. So that brings us to this, we have scientific information, small bubble, we have contextual understanding, another small bubble, we put them together, you get a bigger bubble. And this bigger bubble is where we call it the actionable knowledge. So we want to act. And that act has basically have scientific information as well as contextual information. If we do that, then what we need is trust. And the trust word has come out many times. This trust is very important. It is not only trust in the government, it is also the trust that I have in creating the knowledge. Because the knowledge itself has become really very untrustworthy right now. Because I can tell you that rainfall from one part of Lake Urmia and another part, they are different. And they will be different, and I can use it for 2 different reasons. So that means you can even start claiming my scientific uncertainty as a way to not developing trust. So that trust is not only trust in the process itself, also in the knowledge that we create. Once we have both, then what we call that we have water diplomacy then. So talk about then, when I'm trying to do this, I have some guiding principles. The guiding principle is there are only 2. So we're saying that we want to create sustainability. And sustainability, then you say, well, yeah, tell me what is sustainability. I said, no, I'm not going to tell you what sustainability is. Sustainability for Urmia Lake is quite different than sustainability for California. So these also need to be decided by the people who are affected by it. So the sustainability definition is very ambiguous, but we need to be careful really and decide as a group what do we mean by sustainable ecosystem for Urmia Lake. Then we talk about equity. What is equity? Who are you to tell me that farmers do not have right to water? I'm not going to tell you. I asked the farmers to tell me, and then the Iranian government and the NGOs and everybody else to come to the table and then decide really what we mean by equitable distribution of water for Urmia Lake, given that I have a lack of 1 billion cubic meter every year. Then only I can have a equitable distribution that is jointly decided by the people who are affected by it. We outsider, what we could do that, look, we have tried it in California, this is the way we did it a little bit better, this is why we got into trouble. So that knowledge can be transferred. But actual solution need to be understood at the Urmia Lake level, not really at the California level or at the global level. For that, then we need 4 things. We need variables and processes, actors and institutions. And these you can think about the nodes, these are linked. How closely they are linked? Right now there is at least sense that the actors and institutions are getting aligned because they want to solve the problem. So if they want to solve the problem, then we need to figure out really how to do this. So then we go into this. These you have already seen, so I don't need to go here. So once you have this, then what do? Do you want to prepare your stakeholders to explore and find possible non-zero sum solutions? So this is what I'm very careful in what I read, explore and find. Those solutions do not exist right now. If we are just looking at the solutions that exist, then people have done it. People are very smart. And I gave you example of this Children of Heaven. This is, I think, is a very good example. So it's not that basically, I like Iranian movies because these are extremely creative movies. So that means there are extremely creative individuals. So it's not that it's a lack of talents. It is a question of really how do you frame the question and how do you even make just a pair of shoes, an entire movie. This is brilliant. So the question is that how do you start exploring that space and find solutions, those are non-zero sum for the Urmia Lake. Then only you can get somewhere. To do that, really what we need to do, that we need to create value. Meaning that I have to create something that does not exist right now. So these are, we're calling that creative options. That you create options without committing. Right now in this room we can come up with all kinds of options and we may not be able to implement those. But at least we should be able to suggest those. Look, this looks like an interesting solution. This is the way we'll address this. So this is what we're calling that you create value through innovative options. And then you need someone who can facilitate this. So we need a mediation who can facilitate this mutually beneficial outcome. So in that sense, like for example, David is just a consensus building institute is doing it for all kinds of complex problems around the world. So they have figured out certain things. The certain things have to happen. If you want to bring in 2 competing and conflicting groups to talk, because they will start fighting, because you have seen the picture that Kabe was showing, both are showing the 6 and 9 and it's not clear who is doing what. So that narrative has to be consistent and that narrative can be done by third party neutral, because this person has no interest. So if you ask me really, like for example, David or me, really, we do not have much interest really in Iran because we are not from there, we have no vested interest, Iranian government is not paying us money, so we could be neutral. And then we can say that, look, I think what you're saying doesn't make sense. You're telling me that climate change is an important problem, but the data tells me that the rainfall has not changed. So how do you make your case? So you have to defend your case that when you say that climate change is the culprit, then I ask you, tell me how. Then you say, no, it doesn't make sense, maybe I need to go back. That is the way conversation can begin. So we need to raise those questions by a third party who is not really seriously vested in the process itself. That is very powerful. I think that can, in that sense, a global community can be helpful. That they can be a neutral mediator amongst the competing groups. Who will get more water? Is agriculture wants to get more water, or the urban development should get more water, or domestic use, whatever it is. Then you help participants to think and explore options and changes to create mutually beneficial outcomes. So that is what the mediator can do, that you have to think and explore all those options. If we can do this, then we can go somewhere. So that is where I will stop, I think, and then we want to spend next hour or so to look for those creative options. So we understand that this is a complex problem, and we understand that the complexity has some sources. So first thing would be to see really whether we can at least identify the sources of that complexity. Is it coming from some type of uncertainty? If it is, how do I start addressing those? And then maybe we can think about what to do, say, in next 3 to 5 years and maybe 5 to 10 years. If we can go at least in that direction, that will help us really organize our thoughts. So I'll stop there. So I put this in because this is now I changed the topic here. You can see really. So it is not analysis or process. It is not numbers or narratives. It is not models or meanings. This is the way we view this. We are saying that in between you need to create something else. You can do as much analysis as you want. You can create as much process as you want. and create numbers, create narratives, come up with models, create meanings. None of these are going to solve the problem unless we have a purpose. And then we need to decide what that purpose is, and then how do we get there. So with that, I'll stop, and then we'll keep this on the board and open it up for our engaged conversation, hopefully.
Thank you, Shafir, for your wonderful presentation. Let me to start the second part of our roundtable discussion, and I would like to Shafir and James to lead the discussion. Yes, please.
Okay, well, we've had a nice progression, and it's good to know the water diplomacy framework, since that's part of the framework that's been used to organize this conference and to have some discussion of how the knowledge is going to be both pursued but also used. I have a sense that we have some questions, and I'm be sure that in particular the people on the outside rung get a chance to kind of speak up and ask some questions. So why don't we lead with the questions that we have for Professor Wadani and also for Shafiq, because we're really shifting already into themes that we'll be carrying through tomorrow, building on the science from this morning. Who would like to lead off with any questions, comments?
Comments, I can.
Well, you had one pending from 2 hours ago.
I don't think it's relevant to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Ashok?
It's not questions, comments. Is that okay?
It's okay.
Okay, thank you. I think the question comes, I need to go back to the morning, going back to the interest at the top of the political leadership in Iran into the issue. And I think it's a double-edged sword. We need to realize this. Because why I'm trying to get this, because I think you need to look at it when this kind of political decision making takes place on the election time. It can work, it cannot work. Let me give you an example, which is Indian example. The Indian Prime Minister has come he has given thousands.
I think the India takes us a little bit too far afield. As much as I'm curious about your example, let's try to keep it.
Okay. The issue is that if you give an election time, because I was giving very short one. It's a one sentence. His election promise on cleaning Indus and putting a lot of resources on Indus, but I think he would prefer not that it should not work, because then he can put it on other parties to get the political benefit out of it. So the political leaders, when they usually go for this at the election time, they might use it if it doesn't work. So it doesn't mean that they have all the interest that this activity is working or this commitment is working. Even if it doesn't work, they can get the political benefit if they can blame another political group. So that's what I'm saying. The second part is, which I find is interesting, is the issue of, because if there are lots of examples we brought in from the international basins or the international lake basins to this local or the internal issues. But I think if there are lots of water agreements which have taken place between different parties, they have been all resilient in spite of climate change, in spite of all kinds of things among the international groups or the international actors. Whereas internally, it hasn't really worked that well, and which we haven't really brought it up in our research that much. But if you look at it, I'm not going far to India, let's go to your neighboring country, Pakistan. In the Pakistan, which has worked, we always get this example of Pakistan and India again, getting the Indus agreement in spite of everything from 1960, working on it. That's very resilient. But if you look at the agreement within Pakistan, between Sindh and Punjab on Indus, that has not worked. That has been done many times, it has fallen through many times. So the question comes when, because you brought it up that yes, we can do it because we don't have international actors involved. It's an internal issue. But even if internal issues is actually, if you look at it, if you get an agreement at an international level, it's much easier to, resilient rather than in the internal issues. So I think that has to be taken into account.
Thank you for the comment. Any elaboration on the relationship between the provinces of East, West Azerbaijan and Kurdistan as to their dynamics that bear upon solutions in the lake?
First point, regarding if the president's promise was legitimate or not, I don't think in that country there is any reason for him not to be successful. I think he can get credit for being successful and get reelected. And the problems are appearing in different places. When we had the Khuzestan dust storm, again, he was very, immediately, these are security issues for the country. The Turks are very strong politically, and they can be, they can make the government unstable. So there's no reason for dragging this problem too long. They want to solve it, but it is very hard for them to solve. Yes, I'm with you on sometimes international treaties might be easier to sign. Not always, though. We can see the case of the Nile or Jordan. So it depends on the power balances. It depends on how serious the end point is, in a sense that when the crash is happening, when the clash is happening, when the end of the story is coming, right? If we knew that, climate change, if we knew when the end of the world is coming, we would have signed a treaty tomorrow. The problem is that we don't know when. Same thing for Urmia. We still don't know when the lake will completely dry up, and then we don't know how to cooperate. I mean, what to cooperate over, because we have built a lot of dams. Now, what are we going to do? And also, it is like ecosystem benefits of the lake are not really clear. This is a salt lake. I mean, still, it's nice to have it there. It's a source of, it feeds this and it feeds that, and it's part of the chain of but it's not like lake. It's not Caspian Sea with sturgeon and caviar. It's not like a place that we really know the benefits of. So to many of us, it was a salt lake. We were happy there to swim because you were never drowning there. But it's not that clear. So even the provinces, I don't think it's a symbolic thing. It's a prestige or reputation, but it's not something like really valuable in a sense that what you're missing exactly economically.
Actually, in the first program that I mentioned, that it was indicated to allocate 3 billion square meter to the lake. It was distributed between the 3 provinces. I think 1.5 for Kurdistan, 2.8 for East Azerbaijan, and 1.8 something like this for West Azerbaijan. West Azerbaijan was not agree with that, because they were saying that East Azerbaijan has already improved and established their dams, improved their irrigation networks, and they have already done their agricultural progress, and now it is our turn to improve our province, and because of that there were some conflict. But I believe the main problem that caused the first program could not be successful is not really this issue that we couldn't somehow manage the request of the provinces. Even in case of East Azerbaijan, that had the lowest amount of water to be allocated for the lake, even in that province, I'm sure they have problem to convenience people to reduce the farmers to reduce their agricultural demands. So I believe the first the problem and the first priority to solve the problem is how we have to interact with farmers to convenience them to collaborate with any program for restoration of the lake. I believe it is possible to manage requests and at the government and provincial level. It is easier to solve the problem because we have a powerful central government and they can manage the governors and communist governance. But when we come down from governor level to farmers, to people, I think the problem starts. I don't know. Kaval may have some comments on it.
So do you know any transboundary agreement, river agreement within the country? Because actually transboundary systems are new for us because when the water authorities were reformed, we started having transboundary systems. We didn't have transboundary systems. They were transboundary in terms of geography, but they were all managed by the same authority in the past, right?
Talking about Urmia Lake, or you are talking in general?
I mean, in general, in the country. I mean, thinking about Kezalozan, thinking about Karkhe, thinking about Zayanderud, these are all transboundary systems, and in none of them we have really reached any agreement. And some of these are new problems because we reformed the water authorities, right? The boundaries.
Actually, no, in case of Urmia, it is not that much transboundary because the rivers are, around the lake. A little bit in case of Kurdistan, we have such a problem with, but other rivers, almost the boundaries are completely in one province. Fortunately, from this point of view, we have less problem.
But the lake is shared. So it's a common source.
Yes. There are not much income from the lake that to be shared. As you mentioned, still the values of the Lake Urmia are not very clear. So none of the provinces directly, gain from the lake. What we are now worried is the consequences of going on, the lake to be dried, and health problem and other consequences.
Let me follow up with a point that Professor Mourid mentioned about the essential interactions with farmers. And this is taking the water diplomacy framework and what Shafiq was making in his presentation on the potential value in many levels of joint fact-finding, citizen science, and basically in the case where farmers are actually engaged in this process of scientific inquiry, planning, and management. Is that been happening up till now, or is that a major emphasis up till now in the Urmia Lake research?
Would you like to elaborate?
Yes, where the research program is being conducted jointly with the farmers and farm groups who are most affected. Is there actually within farm family, children, full engagement?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and would that change the outcome? Like, if we do the research with them, so it's not going to incentivize them to change behavior as long as we don't really give them something else, right? If there are discussions that actually Dr. Mourid, we have discussed it in the past, that Dr. Mourid was concerned about the discussions about irrigation efficiency, that people were saying if we increase the irrigation efficiency, we solve the problem. And the point of discussion was, if you increase the irrigation efficiency, the farmers will change the crops accordingly. So they keep using the same level of water anyway, right?
So those are two different points. Let's have Shafiq respond with, because your argument has been challenged.
Yeah, so the idea is, that's why I think we need to have reframing. So let me go back to what Ilana Ostrom would say in this type of situations. So Ilana Ostrom is the one who won Nobel Prize for economics. So predominant economic thinking is that essentially it is a zero-sum game. We are all basically selfish. We want to maximize our own profit. So this is one way to think about this problem. Water is really different. Water is a common pool resource. It is not really managed like something else. Why is it different? So if you look at really her framework, what she is arguing that if you as a farmer can create situation that maximizes your benefit compared to the cost that you incur, that is a local problem. It is not a global problem, so you do it at a local level. So at a local level, you have to create those incentives. Now, my question, what those incentives may not always be really financial. Like for example, if you go back to human civilization, really, we used to be very cooperative. Why? That was also self-interest motivated, because at that time, when I killed a bison today, I shared it with my neighbors because I did not have refrigerator. So I could not preserve it, I have to basically, otherwise it will get wasted. So I gave it to my neighbor, so next time I don't have a kill, my neighbor will share it with me. How do we create those type of structure locally? That essentially can change the dynamics. It is not really that, right now for example, a outrageously simple example would be that no matter how much money I have, I cannot consume 30,000 calories in a given day. But I can easily keep $30 billion in the bank. So we have basically created everything in terms of money. That optimization doesn't work for common pool resources. So we need to think a little bit differently really how I can create that structure for the farmers where for them it may not be money. It may be their heritage that I have been farming for last 3 generations and I want to do that even at a loss. Unless we understand that part of the dynamics, it's very difficult to come up with solutions.
Just one comment on his. Yes, actually, in Iran we used to have qanat. I think everybody knows qanat. Okay, when we had qanat, farmers had to cooperate and to have benefits of the qanat. Even villages have some kind of interaction to maintain it, maintenance operation. Many activities were going on to keep the qanat safe. At that time, we had high level of cooperation between the farmers. But after new technology came in the ground and we drilled on those wells, water management that was a cooperative, practice became to a single, management, and this is really one of the problems we have.
Yeah, I actually want to take a step backward because it's very interesting when it comes to temperature and climate and things like that, and I understand that's a different type of science. We tend to speak science and respect that, but when it comes to people, we just assume that if we give them more water, they're going to use all of it. And it's interesting for me, I don't know if there are any studies on what these people think or how they have behaved, how they might behave in future. I found something, I don't know it, I mean I didn't know the writer, and I just, it was done in Iran by someone, with some kind of university students, and they have talked to some of these farmers, and I mean, from my view, I came to this, I didn't know much, so I just assumed that there are, kind of stereotypical ways of thinking about farmers. I thought these are poor farmers that rely on farming for day-to-day living. And then the findings in this very short article based on interviews with a couple of farmers and survey forms with about 100 or more than that, showed that it's not the case. So I was wrong in my assumptions, and I think for just being able to talk about what the issue is, we need more information. It's probably what you were talking about when saying, are we lacking information? Is it knowledge that we're lacking? Is it our perception? So I really would like the Iranian team to comment if there are research initiatives being done on how people think or how they behave, or even numbers. What's the percentage of the farm? I don't know, whatever qualitative or quantitative data that can add to the table when we discuss these sensitive issues.
Professor Moghera and
Yes.
Maureen.
No, I don't.
I think the people doesn't think like us. In 10 past years, we have another problem. Rich people getting 200 or from 200 to 1,000 square meters for having a garden, so you from this garden. And all these gardens have a well without permission. So this is the main problem now. Everybody want to have such a garden or such a land. So it is, I think it is another problem is increasing the problems of the Urmia, even the problem of the watershed.
Actually, mainly, we are engineers and we have not had, that much social study and really our background about social, activities, and social research work in the basin is not much enough to really add anything on the table. Maybe Dr. Darghami, if you... Kaveh, do you know any, social studies in the...
I mean, if Mahdi wants to comment on this, let him, because I wanted to also answer the other question. But my take on, the farmers in this basin is that they're not like subsistence farmer. We have a lot of trees. Actually, the number of tree growers is increasing. So a lot of people who are rich, there are people who make money. So it's not the typical farmers that we think, poor farmers who really, but that's, when they're farmers, they have incentives and they want to do what makes them happier and what's good for them, right? And then to just, compliment what Shafiq said earlier, Elinor Ostrom's theory or observation applies to highly underdeveloped areas, right? Iran is a good example. We had very nice cooperatives, we have very old systems of water management, water rights, water trades even, and they were perfect. They were working fine. As soon as we had land reforms, it's not only wells or technology, land reforms of the Shah of Iran who wanted to give more power to the farmers. Then the disaster started. That's a turning point in the history of Iran's water management and land management. And then the issue is that everything changed. Now, water is a common pool, resource, but we're talking about farmers managing their water, and then we're talking about Lake Urmia. These are two different things. Like farmers are concerned about the water going through their land which is beneath their land. They're not concerned about Lake Urmia. So I'm not sure how much they can how you can create those incentives. But definitely the number of cooperatives we have is low. The size of farms we have is very small, so definitely, the yield is pretty low. So there are ways to empower the farmers, and I personally think that's one of the things we have missed. We haven't invested enough to do that.
David, Hoja, Auntie, and okay.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Three related comments leading to a question. I think that if we're focusing on farmers, it is very interesting to recognize that along with incentives that are material, people like to contribute to something that makes them feel good about themselves. And we've got lots of evidence from lots of countries of people developing an awareness of their role in ecosystems as well as in society and being motivated primarily, or not exclusively, but substantially by that. So I would say that in this context, I really think we are talking about a sustainable regional development problem. This is not primarily a Lake Urmia problem. I think you've demonstrated this 6 times today. So if you started with that frame, from our experience, I would say you shift from problem solution to vision experiment. Meaning, if you had a process to develop a shared vision of a healthy lake, a healthy region, and healthy farmers, and you said, we want all of these things, and we're all committed to achieving all of those things, and you used the existing institutions, but you brought in more grassroots representatives to have dialogue, to shape a vision together for getting all good things for the region and for the stakeholders in the region, you'd be in a very different conversation. It wouldn't be about taking a limited amount of water and in a zero-sum way allocating it. It would be about how do we get to all of the things that we want. Healthy farming, healthy lake, healthy region. So that's point one. Second is, I think when we think about involving farmers and other local actors, absolutely we need to run the experiments to see Is it true that we can have more productive and more profitable farming with lower water use? And I read that you have some pilot projects on this that are demonstrating success. Well, you have to have a strategy for using pilots to then change awareness and change incentives. That's demonstrated hundreds of times in experiments around farmer extension and early adopters, and what does it take to go from early adopters to step change. So to have a systematic approach in experimenting while acknowledging it's an experiment, you can't tell the farmers today. My question's following. You can't tell the farmers today it will be better. You actually, in the sense that Jim raised around joint fact finding, engaging the farmers in the question, is it possible to have both higher profit and lower water use? You tell us. We'll help you find out. But you, the farmers, you're the ones who are going to run these experiments with our help. Third and last, the institutional frame for such a sustainable vision and then a set of experiments really does need to involve the full set of economic actors and stakeholders in the region, and not to be focused only on those things that are directly related to who contributes water or takes water. As was mentioned before, the tourism industry, job creation outside the agriculture sector, because if you take the example from what Shafiq showed of the nodes, if jobs are a critical factor in some farmers' mindset, they'd be willing to switch out of the agricultural sector, but they need to have a better job. That has to enter in. So, vision, the experimentation, the full range of opportunities and stakeholders. My question, having offered this rather elaborated thought, is how does this resonate? Are you already on this path in what you're doing institutionally? If you're not on this path, does this path make any sense?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Somebody else have their hand up first.
Let's see if anyone is responding.
I can answer that question, if you will. I mean, regarding shared vision planning and participatory management and the social learning, of course, these are good solutions. Can you implement that in California today? It's really hard to implement it, right? So the issue is that. Is it possible to make more profit with less water? Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. I mean, the crop pattern is wrong in that basin. They're using primitive technologies. The irrigation efficiency is super low. Absolutely, it's possible. Who should finance the change? Second question. And you know, the third is, of course, the solution is to industrialize the country. That's a solution for many, you know, the developing world who's offering their water and land to the rest of the world, right? So, you know, you're giving your water up to buy technology and so on. So it's better to send out technology, export technology, and buy food and water. The problem is, again, who should finance that, and then how do we do it? You know, we know, like everyone knows that it's just hard to implement. It's same thing for California today.
So this is a little bit technology oriented, but I saw on one slide earlier today, there was a mention of wastewater treatment, and I was wondering why that wasn't elaborated upon, and is that a potential recharge effort? Has the volume potential been decided to be negligible? And then, of course, getting back to our favorite topic, the farmers, I would like to know what the animal farming environment is like, because manure, specifically pig manure, has a 90% moisture content. So if you looked into advanced technologies in treating that high moisture content and, you know, and providing a water supply.
No, we don't have any keyword.
Animals, any manure, and waste, and or wastewater. I mean, humans and animal waste. Obviously, high moisture content. So we looked into treatment mechanisms as a supply approach, or is the volume potential negligible? I mean, that's really the question.
As I understand you say that why and how much we do work with the treating the wastewater.
Wastewater, yeah.
And the wastewater mostly is for cities, and the cities are now just using about 3 up to 5% of water. And treating of them is in progress, and there are lots of projects to treat the waste, and they are treating tertiary, and also they want to allocate that the treated water to the lake, but it is not so huge deal. It
Yeah.
is
From a volume
1 or 2%.
standpoint.
Yes.
Yes, okay, so I feel like we're a little bit floating in Shafiq's chaos sphere right now, because we're like, I hear a lot of things, but we're not trying to simplify the question. So when I think about what Shafiq
This is
said.
the reason that we invited you to.
Thank you. When I think of what Shafiq said, he said we had these three spheres, right? Spheres. We have the natural sphere, we have the social sphere, and they overlap in the political sphere. And he also said that water is a network and not a system. And I slightly disagree with him on that. Because I think if you combine the two, the natural, the social, and the political, and then think about networks and systems, I personally believe that the natural is actually a system which you can map with reservoirs and flows and everything that you can do. The social is a network. And by putting them, the connection between the natural and the social, that becomes an overlay between a system and a network. So I would suggest, in order to simplify the problem, I would suggest that the first step should be to map the system, because that will give us intervention points. There is no reason why we should even think about intervening in a reservoir flow system that is negligible to the problem of the lack of water in Lake Urmia. Once we have identified the large intervention points where the large changes could happen, whether it is evaporation or agricultural irrigation, once we have identified those, then we can overlay the social system and see, well, do any of those intervention points offer a chance to even intervene socially on the social political scale? Because if we do that, we can probably cut out, I don't know, 40% of all the thinking, and we really go from this chaotic system to a much more well-defined thinking.
Okay, let's hold that important thought for Ben Bojit, if you'd offer your comment or question.
Yes, I have one comment and one question. My comment is that there is no doubt that the water, the crisis in Urmia Lake is a complex problem. So as a complex problem, it cannot be tackled and addressed only by engineers, modeling approach, and structural works, and like water transfer projects. So firstly, we need to recognize and acknowledge that this problem is a complex problem. Why? Because we need to reframe, as Shafiq mentioned, reframe the problem. Let me mention one thing, that 2 decades ago, when we started to construct a lot of dams in the basin, we ignored the environmental issues in the basins. So we have been facing this problem. But now we are following and we are going in the wrong way again. Why? Because at the moment we ignore in our studies, in our plans, social issues. I am worried about the future. Why? Because I am worried about that, for instance, in next 5 or 10 years, we must gather around the table again and talk about how we can tackle social problems, how we can address social problems caused by, for instance, water transfer projects. These 19 projects, I am seriously worried about this. I think the governments, the policymakers, and the scientists, I'm an engineer, but we need to acknowledge and recognize social studies. Otherwise, we will face the problem. And another one, my question is that, about this, what's the plan? What's the plan for social studies? do we have any studies about the governance system in the basins? Because most of the time we talk about the projects. As Shadiq mentioned, we should reframe the problem. I think we need to emphasize on the governance system in the basins. We have problem in legal issues, political, cultural, historical, agriculture, urban. It means that we need to emphasize on a good governance system in the basin. Otherwise, I think we will face a problem. Thank you.
What's interesting is our last two comments have a really great relationship with one another. How can one simplify the problem on the other hand, and how can one have the full richness and complexity, but in a very deeply insightful way? Maybe they can go together. You have a question?
Yeah, it's more a comment. In the last part of the talks, we have been talking about the farmers, basically the last 2 hours. And I kept thinking about, we are talking about the farmers as if they were just one bubble. And I think that inside the farmers' universe, there are different layers. So we have the small properties, the bigger farms. I don't know, perhaps that's the case. For instance, I have been working in Argentina in development projects for the agricultural sector. And one of the first activities we have done in those moments is sending some socioeconomist expert to make a survey with all the farmers to delineate these different groups. So we have the small farmers, the intermediate farmers, and the bigger farmers. And then the way we can address their necessities is completely different. It's not the same to talk and to hear the interests and the values of the smaller farmers than these big pools of soy, wheat, and this kind of. I'm not talking that in Iran you have these crops, but this is how we tackle the problem in Argentina. So I keep thinking, is there any assessment of these different types of farmers in this Urmia basin, and is there any way of sending different people to talk to these different groups? Is there any consortium, is there any union of farmers so we can have different stakeholders, as David was mentioning today?
Let's see, I think one more. You go first, and then Jeff, and then Mike.
So before there was a presentation that showed.
We're just getting sorry.
There was a presentation that said that there were 88,000 wells in the watershed. I just am curious to know, if I were a person in that watershed and I owned one of those wells, do I know that I'm within the Urmia Lake watershed? And also, do I know that the groundwater can act to recharge the lake?
I didn't understand the question. Could you take
Do you believe that most people who own wells know that they are within or without, or within or outside of the Urmia Lake watershed? And do most of the people who own those wells know that their well is drawing upon water that can recharge the lake?
That's very good question. And the problem, if you read the book of Elinor Ostrom, this is the governing the commons, and we face the tragedy of the commons that the farmers see that the others are digging the wells and making money, and then he get incentivized to make it well, and then we need to make new institutions to learn that farmer that you are making bad issue for himself and more for your next generation, but it's difficult. The economy is also working bad in regarding today.
But
And there's some hydrogen.
in my opinion, most of people, they don't know.
Okay.
They don't think they are drying the lake.
Yes.
They are getting the water and decreasing the water level. They don't know this.
Okay.
I also think that, sorry, there is not that much communication between this higher level governing people, governments with those lower, I don't want to call it lower layer, but the individuals and the farmers. They know that there is a problem, they know that their lake is drying, but they don't know their shares. I mean, education, I think, plays a good role, and NGOs are doing a good job because I was in January there and I just talked with the 3 of the NGOs, and they are actually doing a good job, but it's not enough, I think it's.
In the last 2 years, there is a good connection between the government and people. Very good.
Through NGOs, right?
Yeah,
Not directly.
Because of the socio-economic committee of restoration of Urmia Lake. Good activities in the region and good connection between governance and people.
How do you know that?
We need more than now.
Yeah, I know, it's not enough.
But in last year, we took
To the decreasing of the lake water level is very sharp. So even the educated people, they didn't predict this situation.
Okay, so this is really good, as this conversation is unmediated. You had a comment first, and then...
Yeah, first an apology to Shafiq, I am not going to offer a solution, because...
We don't want solution.
Okay.
Resolution.
And I'm going to make it more complicated. So we have heard a couple of times the word ecology thrown out, but just to make that a little bit more concrete, while everyone is thinking about this, since 9 o'clock this morning, we've only been talking about one species. And there's hundreds or thousands of species in and around this lake that
800 species.
that are all going to be impacted.
Yeah.
So while we're figuring out what's best for this one species,
Yeah.
let's not forget the impact that our species is going to have on everything else.
Thank you.
Well, I hesitate to say something, although I'm encouraged by the conversation coming back to the social repeatedly. I think maybe an excellent outcome of the workshop would be a call by the workshop to stop the marginalization of social science in Iran. Iran has no social scientists, I'm exaggerating, has no social scientists who go out and do what Jaleh asked us to do, which is to actually map things on the ground, talk to people. This has been destroyed over the last 30 years. There was this kind of activity earlier. We have some very good studies of agriculture, including during the land reform. And it's a crying need. So if Dr. Locke thinks that there is good communication between the national government and the people on the ground, I would like to know what the basis of that evaluation is. Just setting up a task force doesn't do the job. You really do need to talk to the people. As to whether or not people know that they're contributing by drilling wells or not, I don't know the situation around Urmia, which is different, but I do know that for 50 years now in Yazd, people know that their drilling wells are decreasing the level of the groundwater. These are well-known problems. Iranians have been talking about these problems for decades. But what we don't have is precisely the information that's being called for around the table. And it's not that hard to collect, but it does require actually being allowed to do it, which has not been possible, particularly under the Ahmadinejad regime. But even now, I mean, I just was in Iran, all too briefly, and I did talk to my anthropologist and sociologist friends. They do some good conceptual work sitting in their universities, but they don't do what Americans do, which is to go out and talk to the farmers. And so you're right, we do need to have an account of what we mean by farmers. Are they peasants? Are they firms? Are they capitalist, business plan oriented firms? Are they large? Are they small? What part of the agricultural economy are they participating in? What are the alternative job creation activities that might be possible? I don't know about ecotourism as a panacea for these kinds of problems. It works in certain places like Costa Rica, but in other places it creates its own problems. So these are things that do need the real participatory activity of having Iranian social scientists going out and talking to people, and Iranian social scientists who do it seriously. You can go out and do a survey and get all kinds of wrong answers because people are trying to predict what the government wants them to say. But there are techniques for dealing with this, and it would be wonderful if the engineers and the scientific community in Iran, social scientists have not much standing even in the United States, but if the scientific community said, we can't solve these problems without having good social science, that might help.
Thanks. Sharif. So this is another example of complexity. Even the discussion itself is becoming very complex. If you think about this, really, see, we are floating around. I think Anjay is right, and it's not clear exactly what to focus. To focus this, what I think I would like in the concludings that I had, so I just preempted, I think, is first we need to ask three questions. We ask three questions really before I can even frame the question. Is water for whom, or who decides and how? Now, who decides water for whom is very important here. Now, is Iranian government going to decide really water for agriculture or for the lake? Then the next question will be how that will be done. So unless these three questions are posed and discussed, we cannot ask the question, because right now the question is too loose, because it is basically floating around, and these are all very intelligent and thoughtful questions, but not actionable. So what we argue really in water diplomacy framework, that yes, I think some questions are very nice, but may not be actionable at the time and the place that we are in. So it is very important that we need to first situate ourselves in that particular place and particular time and particular constraints, because each system, like whether it's a system or network, these are different ways of thinking about the problem. We are not against system thinking. System in my mind is usually the way it is taught, like for example in engineering, in other places, this is bounded. Like there are defined boundaries. To give you an example, if you ask me really, I want to make this room temperature 20 degrees Celsius, I can do it, because it's a bounded system and I can put enough gadgets to make it 20 degrees C. But if you ask me that I want to make 20 degrees for Boston, I cannot do it because it's open system. Air will come in and go, so it's problematic. So having said that, when we talk about complexity, I think one thing I want you to think about really is that in complexity, what we do as individuals at a very small level may affect the aggregate level behavior. What does that mean? Basically, what each of us buy in our own day-to-day, that affects the economy. But it's not linear. That is what the problem is. These are not easily, I cannot add them up to find out but at the same time, what government does in terms of policy also affects me, how I spend. So what complexity tells you that, look, none of these are linearly additive. So I simply cannot use Newtonian type of mechanics to get a predictable outcome. So at the heart of it is then what it is that whatever you do, your future is going to be very uncertain. But you have some information, based on that information you have to act. And how do you act? You act with a purpose. And what is the purpose? That purpose now should come from perspectives. That's where the social science could be very powerful. So what I'm making, maybe as a call we can say this, since Iranians make wonderful movies, it may be very useful, I think, to create a documentary to tell these stories in a way that can appeal to many people, and a very short one, maybe a 15 to 20 minutes documentary to show in a very intelligent and tangible way that, look, this is what is the problem. Right now, even the problem is not clear. So how can I solve the problem if I don't know what the problem is? If you tell me, no, the problem really is I want to restore ecological services for the Urmia lake, there is a lack of 1 billion cubic meter of water. What do? Then I say, okay, so you have given me a problem. Now I tell, so who decides for whom the water is important? And then I say how I do this. If you go through this line of thinking, then you will go somewhere. Otherwise, I think we'll keep on floating and feel good that we are doing some interesting work, but not really very useful, not very actionable.
Okay, well, we're certainly feeling good. Jory, I think.
Jory,
One question. Jory.
Yeah, so I'm liking some of the ideas I'm hearing, but I am also thinking about the fact that we only probably have a few more hours of actual discussion time combined today and tomorrow. So I thought of one way that, I want to propose one way we might be able to, make the last few hours of our meeting a little bit more actionable while we're all here. And, we've been hearing about this list of 19 projects. Some of us might know a lot about it. I don't know a lot about what they are, but I get the impression that they're more public works engineering type of projects. I like the idea that was put forth about having some sort of resolution about including more social science into this work. So one idea that I had is that to make a more tangible deliverable, what we could do is come up with a commentary that social science is focused about these 19 projects, possibly come up with other projects or blue general concepts of projects that are more social science oriented or more like education or behavior change oriented than engineering oriented. Then also there might be some issues about how we decide among these projects and whether we go with a simple economic optimization versus issues that also take equity into account, or how do we address different levels of governance and budget constraints in considering these alternatives. So maybe something that moves in that direction of a social science-oriented response to this list of 19 problems, which I presume has been fairly widely consulted in this whole discussion about Lake Urmia.
Tori, thanks very much for that comment on how, what kind of outcomes might be useful from the workshop, and how can the discussion realistically tomorrow take that up so that it really can be oriented towards having some ideas that from Iran, these are worthwhile ideas to pursue, and also to try out. Unless it's interesting that the agenda for tomorrow is on socioeconomic aspects of the restoration plans. And I imagine that will be jointly across all the disciplines of engineering and science, social research, and humanities. That would be terrific.
Jim, there's a question or comment from the woman right behind you.
So, okay, I was just going to give it a
Sorry,
segue to your
last
comment.
comment.
Please.
I just would like to add that we need a very holistic approach to address this, I can say, maybe science policy interface issue as a complex issue for the lake. We need to have more participation from other fields like journalists, Iranian journalists, and some experts in the fields of anthropology, sociology, and we need a very accountable and transparent system for this problem. And for example, we need to account the ecological services in the lake. We need to know about the value of Artemia in the lake. I'm not sure about the researches around that, or migratory birds around the lake, or it's not, because it's not only of the participation of farms. We have biodiversity issues around the ecosystem, this ecosystem, besides other issues. And also, I'm not sure about the environmental indicators, because we need a very strong monitoring system to track changes and progresses. I'm not sure if we have any construction or development system for indicators specifically for the lake or not.
Other comments or questions? Was that we'd like behind? Yes, please.
I think we have to look at it as we have two issues here. One is a very strong temporal issue, because if the trend lines that we're looking at right now regarding the level of the lake continue without any intervention of any kind, we will not have a problem, we will not have a lake. And the social issues that we're talking are no doubt very, very critical, but they are long-term plans. And I think that the focus from, as far as, let's take it from the Iranian government, is to come up with some sort of stopgap that will be able to stabilize the situation and then to deal with the long-term effects of how to deal with all the other things that are equally important. And I don't see that we're going to come up with a stopgap through social sciences. I think we're going to look again into technology, and I'm not sure if the technology is directed correctly. Certainly the idea of putting dynamite in dams and flooding them is interesting. I doubt that anybody is going to break the hundreds of dams that we built. It doesn't make sense.
Plus, it's not even clear to me that
So then we'll
that would be a solution, because as we heard, the lack of depth and the extent of the surface increases evaporation, and dams or lakes from behind dams, reservoirs tend to be deeper with smaller surfaces.
I think overall what happens is, yes, dams tend to be deeper, but we built so many of them that the net surface area of the water has gone up, so we're losing a lot from evaporation, one way or the
Yes.
other.
And yes, as we are concluding the session, I also have some ideas for Urmia Lake restoration. And if we look at the presentations, we have a discrepancy on the numbers and narratives. And for Urmia Lake Basin, we need very rigorous monitoring. I mean that water accounting. And we have not something like USGS. We monitor the lakes, groundwaters, and the second and important part is the sharing the data. We have usually at the university access to the data, and the data is sometimes assumed as a security issue, and then we need to have monitoring and to have the data, not just on the water, on any item related to the lake basin. I mean that how much people uses water where, for what, and how much they make value for that. And then we will be able to decide which part and which crop is much better. And the second issue is that we face discrepancy among the stakeholders, and this is, as we saw, this is basically because of top-down traditional governance. And now because we have reached a problem, then we should, as also the Kaveh mentioned, we should change the governance, and then we should go to the more cooperative work between the farmers and the government. But however, working with very strong government with a poor farmers is difficult. We need new layers of farmers' cooperations, that the farmers should say their interest to the corporations, and the corporation should work with the government, and then we will have solution for it. For example, in the case of the no farming, Nakash, the government wants directly to pay money to the farmers, which is, regarding the bureaucratic issues, is very difficult. But assume that the farmers of each area has a company or something like corporation, and then they know that how much should they allocate the money for the farm. Then we need to build new anticipations and new layers. And as a thought, we may be able to in future work on something like a water parliament to bring the stakeholders and assign them to have a vote, and then using the decision-making tools, accountable votes, and make a consensus. Otherwise, we will lose the tide and the lake will disappear, and then we will not be succeeded.
Just to add to the complexity of the discussion and also the whole issue of Urmia Lake, I think another problem that we have to do research or to tackle the issue of Urmia Lake is lack of reflection on past interventions. There has been a lot of interventions in the region by the task force to tackle the issue, but we don't have enough reflection on what has been done, what was the result, what worked, what didn't work, why such thing happened in the past. I guess when it comes to Urmia Lake, we talk about past, present, and future, but when it comes to the past, we mostly talk about numbers to make trends and talk, this is the precipitation, this is the, we don't talk about narratives of the past. What happened in the past, specifically in terms of policy intervention. I think this is something that we really need to make a next step.
Thank you. Other comments, questions that people would like to have?
I just want to add to what you just said. You know, I worked in the government, and one of the things that we always did was look at best practices. And that really goes with what you are saying. And I think what you have done is you have looked at what's gone on in California. Now, I'm not sure that's best practices. I mean, they are having problems. And so I think that speaks to what you're talking about. And looking at the narratives, where have there been successes? And what happened around those successes, and why was it successful? I see a lot of this being very similar to what we do when we develop applications, systems, information technology, projects. One of the things we do is we do functional requirements gathering, which is very similar to the social scientist aspects, where you really talk to the people who are close to what they're doing and finding out what their needs are and their pain points and all of that. The other thing is we always look at what's short-term and long-term. You know, we know we can't do it all at one fell swoop, and so we try to segment what we can do. What are the immediate issues? And that goes to what you were saying about the temporal concerns here, that you've got to do something. You can't wait until you do all of this. But that goes on at the same time while you're trying to address what's the more immediate needs here. And then you look, what can you possibly do with the long term? The other thing we also do is change management right from the beginning. That's what's important. That's considered best practice. Where you start addressing what you all were talking about with people who are the farmers and who they are and finding out what their needs are and trying to bring them into this and enrolling them into the whole problem. And that's also something that goes on or should go on, not that it does, but should go on right from the beginning, explaining to people, at least even telling them this is what you're looking at. You may not have solutions, but you know, we're doing this and starting to get them involved in all of this. The other thing we do is something that's become very fashionable in the information technology area is something called agile technology. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this, but what they try to do is determine what's the most important essence of what you're trying to accomplish and try to do that little piece, working with the people who are directly involved, and then testing and retesting it and trying to get that little piece right so that if you run out of money or you find you run into problems, at least you have the core of something that you have accomplished that can exist if you can't go any further. So I just wanted to, you know, express how similar, when I hear all this is really to what the standard ways of, or should be the ways that one goes about developing information technology projects.
Thank you. Okay, let's go.
Just one comment to complement these comments. I would like to ask the restoration committee to think more seriously about to design a good governance system for the Urmia Lake. Because designing a good governance system cannot be done by engineers or some PhD students who took, for instance, advanced hydraulic courses or like this. We need to think about these issues and involve other specialists to address the problem. Thank you.
First, we are not the restoration committee.
Yeah, we know that.
But we
no.
really convey your
Yeah.
message. Yes. Just give you one example, successful example in the basin. I fully agree that we have not have good social study in the basin. But as I mentioned, there are a few satellite wetlands in the basin. Especially in the west of the basin, we have a number of them. 2 or 3 of them were going to be dried up. And then environmental people talked with the villages and asked them to restore the wetlands and gain from the wetlands for eco-tourists. And they were very successful. Farmers engaged in the restoration of those wetlands, very small wetlands. Lots of birds came, fishing, and people came to watch the wetlands, and it has lots of benefits for them. But when we are talking about the Lake Urmia, we cannot define a program like that be beneficial for all the farmers. It's a little bit harder than just the experiences that I mentioned here. So as Kaveh mentioned, really, still values of the lake is not very clear for farmers and even for the people. Mainly, it is just we remember, when we were children, we go to the, lake, use those slides or swim. This is all our inception about the LU, Lake Urmia. We need to create some more beneficial, more tangible, accessible, benefits from the lake for the farmers. Then we can have their contribution. Otherwise, just talking about, Artemia, migrating birds, would not be enough to convince them to cooperate.
So about Mr. Inqlabi, I think you are talking about, and he's a kind of father of wetlands in Iran now. And what he did was that government wasn't involved in his project. He did it individually, and government didn't really help that much. He just went to UN himself and gave the money, and he had lots of problems to just transfer it from UN to what he was doing there, and I just talked with him in January. So the point is that he himself went and talked to individuals and educated them and make them to help him. I think this is an educational thing, and if you educate people, they will help, and then they will just get involved in what's happening there. They will do their own shares. I think government didn't do that much in this.
I'm not talking about government. I'm not talking about the corporation of the farmers.
Even for
they
that
cooperated because they would be beneficial from their corporation.
I don't think you're disagreeing.
No.
I think you're in agreement.
Yeah.
So the question at panel is how to incentivize and how to help the government to be succeeded. We don't want to blame anybody. We want to help to solve the issue.
No, I don't blame anyone. My point is that just if you educate people, you can make them to help you. That's my only point. And the experiment says that it is feasible. It's my only point.
Can I say something here?
Yeah, please go ahead.
One thing, remember, we're talking about the lake, which is almost dead. So if we want to restore this lake, we need an action which can result in this, significant change. And education and helping and, those things are long-term. They're definitely effective. They can result in good things. You can form cooperatives in the region, and overall, over a long term, farmers become better off, they're more educated. Still, educated farmers still have their own incentives and they do what they do. And then, one thing, so we're talking about restoration of Lake Urmia, that's a very hard problem. And none of these things can make a significant change. So that's one thing. Then again and again, it's a matter of if it's a priority for the government, and if the government is willing to spend millions of dollars doing things differently, right? Rather than investing in major infrastructure, investing in farming businesses of that kind. And one thing about best practices, when they come up, yes, I mean, it's good to look at best practices, but how many best practices can you name which have been effective in restoring ecosystems which have been damaged significantly in dry areas of the world? I mean, California, yes, they have a lot of deficiencies, but California is still one of the best, managed systems in the dry areas of the world. So don't forget that. We're not talking about Northern Europe, that when they know that getting rid of the meanders was not good, they go and buy back the land and work with people and educate them and create meanders back. So it's a different environment. We don't have a lot of systems that once they pass their threshold, we have been able to restore them significantly.
I see Shafiq is standing up, and I think that is a signal to us that we're coming to our final set of thoughts and transition for tomorrow morning.
Okay, so since there are too many dichotomies, I thought I'd put one here. So this is essentially very well-known dichotomy that but this glass is half full or half empty. So depending on really what your perspective is, whether you are an optimist or a pessimist, and whether we should use the best practices, good practices, or no practices. So we'll shed some light onto this. I think what I would encourage us to think about really, since I teach, really I have to always give homework. So there will be homework from now till tomorrow morning. So that homework will be really a slide that I will share after this one, is what should we think about tonight really, so that we can get a little bit more focus, attention, so that at the end of tomorrow we have some actionable outcome. You have a quick question?
No, I think we should think about the value of Lake Urmia, not just for the country, but globally.
Yeah, so I think so that is again for you to think about tonight really, so tomorrow we will come to that. So this is not what we do really, so we said that basically maybe this is a wrong framing of the problem. So since we are in the reframing of the problem, so if you are a water diplomat, how you reframe it? If you're a water diplomat, this is not a problem really. I think the problem is, this is really a problem of the size, because you didn't have the right size of the glass. If you have the glass right size, it's always full. So the question then becomes really, how do you make that glass full? So that is the reframing of the problem. It's not that basically you already started with a wrong problem, wrong framing. I'm saying that you have to reframe this. That reframing is very powerful. So although I'm giving it with a glass, that can be done with numbers and narratives, or models and meanings. And now people are using models. The one we are engineering, yeah, let's do models. The one in the social science, and no, it has meaning, it has cultural values, it has religious values. All are true. But that does not really take us very far, because we keep talking in circles. What has to happen then is that we need a purpose. So what I argue really, that if you want to basically see what is this water diplomat, is that these are people really who are a purposeful pragmatist. They have a purpose, they're also pragmatic. They understand certain things cannot work because of the situation that they live in. And that is very important to recognize. Under some situations, there may be a very brilliant engineering solution, but not doable. The reason it is not doable because the situations are such that it cannot work. So a good example this I gave really, for example, right now you see all this, YouTube is extremely successful. 20 years ago, YouTube would have not been successful. Why? We did not have that many cameras, we did not have bandwidth. Although computer existed, YouTube did not exist. So YouTube needed certain things to happen. YouTube needed that I need to have a very cheap camera, I need to have a bandwidth, then I can download, upload anything I want. And now everybody is a singer. All around the world, you go to YouTube, everybody sings. It's unbelievable. I think maybe I should also start singing. So what is going on really is that created that enabling conditions. What are those enabling conditions for a particular case is the key. For Urmia Lake, the enabling conditions could be quite different now than it was 20 years ago, than it will be 10 years from now. What are those conditions right now that are enabling and that will allow us to do certain things that will explode? That is what I think we're looking for. So with that, let me go to my last slide, then that's where we'll stop.
I think Surush wants to add a point. If you can call him, please add him to the Skype.
Okay, we'll try that. Okay, sure. Maybe let me finish this and we'll start this. So When we're talking about this redefining, so I'll go into 4 steps to make it very simple so that it's very targeted, and also you can think about this tonight and then we can get more focused attention here. So to solve this problem, or not, I'll not say solve, to resolve this problem, I need to first define the context. So context, basically I ask 3 questions. Who decides, what are for whom, how? That will help us identify and define the problem for Urmia Lake. So I'm here basically only for Urmia Lake, nothing else. So this is my step 1. Step 2 then is represent and refine. I need to decide really who are the people, appropriate stakeholders there. And then I define the network that involves variables, processes, actors, and institutions. That variable could be rainfall, process could be hydrologic processes, actor could be your central government, provincial government, and institutions could be whatever the institutions, those are relevant there. Then you have to locate the problem on a certainty and consensus scale. You have to say that, okay, this part of the problem is not very certain. I have significant uncertainty here, people cannot agree, so that's a consensus scale. In that scale, where does the problem belong? So you may say that, no, my problem really is a complicated problem, it is solvable, if you give me $10 million, it's done. On the other hand, you may decide that, no, there are significant uncertainty, there are significant problem of consensus, I am in a really complex domain. And that complex domain will be little bit helped if I start collecting data for rainfall, because it will help me a little bit. Or no, this is not the problem really is in the perception. People do not even agree really what is important. So that is a very different problem. Then I have to start developing awareness, I have to develop education program and so on. These are very different types of intervention, depending on really how you define the problem. So unless you define the problem, you cannot do this.
There's a problem with the time, in that you have a couple of minutes, and Sarush also wants to come on with a final thing.
Okay, so give me about 5 minutes, and then we'll stop.
5 minutes?
Yeah, because 5 minutes.
We just have 5 minutes.
No, I say, okay. So we are supposed to finish it. These we have to be a little bit more adaptive. So 4:30, unless somebody really have to leave at 4:30, we will stop at 4:30.
We actually do have to leave at 4:30 because there's a cleaning crew coming in.
Okay, so is it at 4:30 or 4:35 will be okay?
No, it is.
Okay, let's continue that. We'll finish. We'll finish. So let's finish quickly. So then, I'll finish in 2 minutes. So then you diagnose the problem and you find out the constraints really. Because the identification of the constraints is very important. So when we are thinking about this tonight, think about what are the constraints in the system that can allow this to happen. And then you go and actually implement. Implement with some plans, procedure, and agreed upon metrics. We need to decide what are we measuring. So that in 3 years from now, I come and tell, okay, this is what I have done and this is what we have gotten. If we do this, then we are here. And the way I have done this really, this is not really a linear process. It is a continuously iterative cycle. So it is not going to be solved at one shot. So you start with the definition of the problem, ensure participation, diagnose the problem, and intervene. Then you go into circles. The question for us is, what is the first circle for tomorrow? I think that is what we want to do. And with that thought, I will stop because apparently Shurush wants to come in also. So let's keep this, and then if you want, I can send this also to everyone that is in the Okay. All right.
Okay, thanks so much. Very lively discussion. Sorry, I was kind of silent, just watching the side. I really appreciate Shafiq, just coming to this time in the meeting. One of the things that I want to point out, I hope there will be a future opportunity for some members of the group. I know Mike has been in Iran a number of times and he commented on the social science aspect, etc. And got good memories of my mother's town, Yazd, and how at least the social scientists are involved in various things. But my Iranian colleagues, the 4 of them that are sitting there, maybe are also in a really, I don't know how comfortable they are to really get into some of these discussions. Carla, of course, speaks up. But my point is, without really being in the area, and even from Shafiq, from even a technical point of view, looking at various engineering solutions, etc., it's easier than really being in the place and looking at the complexities of the issues. So I don't know what the plans are for tomorrow. I hope it's more directed towards better dialogue rather than coming up with solutions from 5,000 to 6,000 miles away without even having been in the location and really knowing exactly the interplay between the various sectors, both from the supply and the demand sides. That's my point.
No, this is perfect. So I think, as we mentioned in the morning also, here we are not really coming up with solutions. And I was going to say this, but that I was told that I don't have time. So let me make one point here. So best practices, good practices, and just practices. Best practices are very good for simple problems. Usually, as I think Kabe was saying, that there are a lot of best practices in California. How come it doesn't work? Because the problem is complex. Best practices work very well really for simple problems. Good practices can work really for complicated problems. For complex problems, the solutions have to be invented by the people who are affected by it. So this has to be done there really. I think I agree with you fully. We can only suggest a process and we can facilitate that process. We cannot come up with solutions that will be really in any way, shape or form even quasi-implementable. So, Kabe, if you want to say something, last few minutes. Maybe we have about 2 or 3 minutes.
What?
Hamid, would you like to say something about tomorrow morning?
Suresh, we can hear you.
In the morning, when I was talking, there was a colleague from Isfahan who commented about, the situation in these Zion River Basin. And he made a point that some of that water has gone to Kerman. As a Kermani, I have to say that I don't think Kerman has benefited from that. And Rafsanjan used to be part of Kerman, but I think they have declared their independence. So I just wanted to set the record straight.
And to conclude, if I may, first of all, thank you, Shafiq, Mahati, Hojat, Hamed. I know you guys have been working really hard on this. Thanks for organizing this. And as you say, I think the major contribution here can be helping framing the problem, helping setting up a new framework and maybe different for looking at the problem. A lot of good things came up. Maddie mentioned monitoring as one of the things. As we said, we still don't know that, we haven't gotten the science right, or at least we can agree on it, right? I mean, there were discussions about if farmers know that by groundwater withdrawal, they're contributing to the problem. Even government, people in the government and our scientists still are unsure about that, and they come on media and say there's no relationship between groundwater withdrawal and what's happening in the lake. So we still have a lot to study and do, and I think, just picking like the right things to study and understand would be really, really helpful. And then, transferring knowledge, of course, if possible, but also please understand that the water management system in Iran is pretty smart, and the people on the ground are extremely smart and well educated. Sometimes the problem is complex, as you said, as in California, as in Texas. So it's not very different. Once the institution is in place, it's really hard to change it. And we would do the same, I promise, if we're in power and if we have any of those roles.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Father. Thank you, all participants. Today, we had very successful and in-depth discussion over the different aspects of the Urmia Lake problem. For tomorrow, we are going to continue our discussion and presentation over the socio-economic problems of the current program of the Urmia Lake restoration. Please join us, and on behalf of our organization, I hope you have had a nice evening and hope to see you tomorrow at MIT at 9 o'clock. Thank you very much. Yeah. And we are going to take a group photo outside the building. Please join us. Thank you very much.